Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to an episode of How to Live Slow. It has been more than a hot minute since I have recorded a podcast episode, and I am so thrilled to be back with this episode with the amazing Sharon Holmes. I've been friends with Sharon for a long time. We've been friends online. We both live in the same city, but we've just connected in different capacities because we've had blogs over the years, particularly, 10 years ago, we were moving in the same circles and attending the same events, and it was really great. And we've stayed connected online and on Instagram, and I'm so thrilled to have Sharon on the show to share with you their book that has just been released. But let me tell you about it. It's called Becoming Gutsy and Formidable, One Life Out Loud. And it came out earlier this year, and I've been meaning to have Sharon on the podcast for a long time. She is an award-winning coach. She's a writer, a speaker, an artist, and a not-for-profit worker. Sharon is a social justice activist and writes a lot about spirituality and personal sovereignty, and she's highly creative. She's got lots of really great resources online. And we talk a lot about what it's like to have different identities. She's biracial, has experienced a lot of online hate because of the work that she does, and how she kind of transmutes that into creating and creativity and spirituality. It's such a beautiful chat, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Sharon on the podcast and share their book with you. Okay, so without further ado, let's meet Sharon. Okay, I've got Sharon Holmes with me today. It's so lovely to chat with you again. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Rachelle. Great to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to chat. This is going to be a good one. So we're talking about your book, Becoming Gutsy and Formidable, One Life Out Loud, which I loved reading. It was really so easy to read, and you were sitting right there telling me your story. So I really, really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. So can you tell us a little bit about you before I start waffling on, and where the book came from? What's the backstory and what a bit of your history as well?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm going to take you all the way back to 2011 in that case.
Okay.
So this is before I had a blog, before I was a coach. This is when I'd moved from my hometown of Sydney to Brisbane in, sort of early 2010. And in 2011, I was getting sort of established, getting used to, my new town, and just trying to figure out what I was into and what things I enjoyed. So before I left Sydney, over the years, I used to take lots of art classes, drawing classes, watercolors, acrylics, ceramic painting, abstract drawing, those kinds of things, silversmithing, so jewelry making. And as I lacked a social life in moving here when I was 33, I just was looking for connection. And so one of the best ways to do that is connecting online and doing something creative, because there's so much passion, there's so much joy, there's so much happiness, there's so much healing in art. And so that's where I began. I started doing art journaling classes, and everything when I first started online everything was for fun. Until things got, serious, and I was unpacking a lot of things and diving deeper into my psyche and myself and healing, and realizing that there were things that needed to rise to the surface and that I couldn't force those things. So the last 12 years have been quite a journey from those, what feels like innocent days of just creating art and scratching my rage into canvas with gesso and covering it up with beautiful art. It was a healing. And I think from there, I was starting again to question, like I did as a teenager, what is the meaning of life? Why the hell am I here? And what kind of life and example did I want to be to my daughter who, had just started school around that time? And so I decided that, with the sort of deep feeling and sensitivity that I had, art was, a great entrance point, and something where, you're not limited to tools and materials, because, your body has You know, you can use your body with art. It doesn't have to be something on a canvas. It can be movement. It can be dance. It can be all kinds of expression. It can be words on a page or, you know, words on the screen. And so I just wanted to dive into everything. And I guess, you know, if I said it in a few words, it's the way that I do these things, why I dive so deeply is because I don't want to get to the end, to my deathbed and go, I didn't go all in on that thing and I wish I had. So I don't want to have any regrets when I get to the end. And even though it's not a theme in my work, I do think about grief and loss and death a lot. And that's because it's a part of life and we're not taught skills to cope when it happens. So I just want to not miss a single thing. And so that means trying everything, you know, sometimes to excess, sometimes to obsession with art, with anything that I do. And at the moment, I'm into miniatures, but that's another story and a very long one for another time.
I have seen those on Instagram. I'm like, oh my goodness, I cannot. If I start, I will not stop. They are so cool.
Stop, Rachelle. Yeah, so for me, it's like not doubting myself when I get obsessed about something that gives me joy and not getting, you know, down in the weeds and caught up in people going, really? That's what you're into? Or like, oh, that's silly, or, you know, that doesn't have meaning. It's like what it means to you. And I hope that through my writing, I've shown people that through my own telling of my story that maybe you do just have this one life. So why not go all in and, you know, become more of you, no matter what the world says, no matter what your family says, no matter what the doubters and haters say, just go all in. And rage and anger are going to be a part of that as well, and just allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that. That's kind of what your whole thing is, what you're sort of saying is using your like we're women, we have to create things. Like that's just almost like a biological drive. Like if we're not creating, there's something, maybe that's what feels missing. Like a lot of us feel like there's something missing, but also to help you connect to that inner rage. And it's funny because the first thing I think of is people thinking, well, I don't feel rage. What do you mean rage? But I bet they do, but we're so indoctrinated into not feeling rage.
Yeah, you can't lose your shit. You got to hold it together. You're supposed to be Wonder Woman, Superwoman.
Yeah, and a good girl. And good girls don't get angry.
Girl. Yeah, that's right. And that's the whole people-pleasing thing. It's like the fawning of, you know, okay, I'm going to minimize myself. I'm going to minimize, you know, my body language size, going in, closing in. I'm going to like hunch my shoulders. I'm going to make myself physically smaller. And then I'll make myself verbally smaller. And then I'll just make myself small. And I think we're all way too good for that. And no matter what age we are, sometimes that realization happens much later.
Yeah.
But when it does kick in, it's actually okay to be angry. You can't just miss out on one emotion in the spectrum and then go, yeah, I can move on with life and skip over that one particular thing, because we need that. I've needed rage and anger to push myself. It's fire, it's fuel.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I do wonder if we're not allowing ourselves to feel strong feelings like rage and anger, then are we allowing ourselves to feel the full spectrum of all the other emotions, like the high of joy, that sort of thing? I do wonder that.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, when I describe some of the things that I experience, particularly at the high end, I feel absolute euphoria, you know, that's intoxicating, that you don't get from anything else, but you need to feel the high and the highest of highs and just let it go. But likewise, with great height comes great depth, and the great depth part is the sorrow, the melancholy. It's the thing that makes people describe our musical tastes as something to, you know, something to die by. Like, you know, this music is so dark, like, but if we don't feel the depth, we can't have the high.
Yeah, absolutely. Music is a big part of the book, and you talk about it all throughout it, and how you've used music, and that you even have a playlist of songs for different emotions. And and I really thought, when I read it, I was like, this is coming at a perfect time for me, because to tell you a little bit of me, I was obsessed. I've been obsessed with learning, and part of my becoming okay with myself is letting myself stop learning. And I've replaced, like, I used to go for these, I know, huge walks I am getting to the point. I'd go for these huge walks and listen to like a whole audio book on fast speed because I was like, I need to know this information. But I've replaced that with music and singing and actually listening to songs and feel it, like letting myself feel through music. And I've never been happier. And I don't know, like I just feel so much.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, like my brain is quieter because I'm not obsessing over needing to learn the next thing.
Yeah,
so thank you for putting that in. Yeah. I guess that's what I took away from the book. Yeah.
Well, that's what I would hope anyone would take away from it. It's like, music, like art, is something you can access. It's something you can tune into. It isn't something you have to do. Art is something you have to do for that type of expression to come through. But music is something you can be a quiet observer to, or like you can air guitar, rock it out, whatever, and just immerse yourself. And so for me, I didn't realize when this evolution of the book came up, because the original one was around 2017, I wanted to include music, but I didn't know, well, one, I wasn't sure if anyone would be all that interested in the presence of music in my life and how important it is. And it's something that people don't necessarily see or know about. What I originally wanted to do was, instead of starting each chapter with quotes, I wanted to use lyrics, but from an intellectual property and copyright perspective, that's a no-no. So eventually it became clear to me that I could talk about music and put a playlist in, honor, reference the songs that moved me throughout the course of not only my whole life, but in writing this book. So the playlist, the soundtrack, is music I listened to as I wrote. So it fueled my words. It inspired me to write maybe some difficult things. It inspired me to let go of some things that were difficult, and just, brought like a richness to my writing, because for me, music and words are, they're kind of a rhythm. It's the way a new word, if you've never said a particular word, say maybe in another language, and you say it, and it just, the way it kind of has this like physical rhythm as it rolls through your mouth. And that's kind of how it's like music is like the eternal gobstopper. You can just like roll with it, like, you learn new words, you learn different ways of crafting things and putting things together and making sense of the world. But it's like a richness to its own vocabulary and the poetry of music that really makes me immerse in it. So I don't just like listen to it, I'm all in. And sometimes I'm all in on songs that aren't even like my favorite genres. It's just
they click with you.
Yeah, they click. How does the songwriter, how does the singer, how does the band like just make it come out that way? And it's so perfect, and it just hits the right spot. Music does that.
It really does. Yeah. And I've been really obsessed this year with nervous system. And I've learned, one of the things I have learned is that singing and music is a really good way of like bringing yourself back down into the window of tolerance of your nervous system. So if you're like for PTSD treatment, in a way, like bringing yourself out of fight or flight or even freeze, singing is a really good way to tone like your vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And I found, well, that makes sense. That's been a little bit of my experience is, coming back online and being more present is through music and singing. So that's
great.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you do sing, like in the car or at home or in the shower, wherever it might be. One thing that I noticed for myself was there's kind of like, I think it comes with visibility, and it comes with, choosing to speak publicly, and in public and as part of events. And that's like, it's kind of like there's a little stuckness in the throat that you realize when you sing, and you might recognize it when you speak, but when you sing, that's when I recognize, that's where there's like a stopper in me. And so it's kind of like singing is like a barometer. It's like, do I need more? Do I need less? Do I need lower? Do I need higher kind of vibe music? So that for me is like what needs unlocking in my throat. And that for me has been like a really big part of the whole expression journey, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that so much. Yeah, and it helps you to, sometimes I'm like, well, what do I feel like? Emotion do I need to tap into? Because I can't access it on my own, but if I listen to a certain song, it will bring me closer to that feeling and allow me to feel it. So I think that's really interesting too. But going back to the book, there are lots of other themes, not just music, not just anger, but you do talk about, the racism you've experienced as a biracial Asian, sexism in the workplace, your neurodivergence and PTSD, which are often hand in hand anyway. For you, what was the most important part to convey, and also what was the hardest to write? Because there are some pretty big stories in the book too, just to change tack.
I mean, overall, I didn't find writing the book hard. It was just that things needed to flow when they flowed. And obviously some things were much harder to write than others, you know, just to get the words right to convey what I wanted to convey, because it wasn't really, writing this book wasn't solely about me expressing myself and using this as an opportunity and outlet to get everything out that I wanted to say. It was really considering the reader in, if I'm going to be writing about this, what do I want the reader to question? What do I want the reader to see in themselves that maybe they didn't see before? You know, what kind of love or joy or, you know, good feeling do I want the reader to get if they don't have it now? Hence why there's lots of questions that dive into each chapter sort of more completely. But I didn't just want to write a book that was just going to be read. I wanted to write a book that people were going to take heed of and maybe, you know, do more for themselves than they've ever done before, you know, to be more discerning, to have better boundaries, to go after what they want, you know, even if it's unconventional, even if people say that's a bad idea, because no matter what decision you choose to make, no matter the outcome, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. The fact is that you did it. And it doesn't mean other people are right. It means that you are just taking one of the many paths that are there for you if you are willing to ask yourself questions, deep questions, to learn more about yourself and to get to know yourself better. And one of the first thing my husband said after he read the book was, you know yourself really well. I don't think I know myself that well. And I do know myself really well. It's taken a lot of hard work to kind of have some little grasp, you know, like a little bird's nest of peace finally. And, you know, I'm turning 47 this year. And so I do feel like in the last couple of years since I finished the book and since the book's been out, there's been a lot of processing and reflection time. And there's been a lot of time taken because I learned through writing the book that whole slow burn thing, you know. I can't force the writing. I can write tens of thousands of words. I can write hundreds of thousands of words, as I have done online for the last, 12 years.
Yeah.
But it's kind of filtering through everything to then just, what does it need to be? Where does it need to go?
Yeah. And in this weird world that we live in, doesn't all need to be shared. And
no, that's right. It's hard to, and I think discerning. As we know, that's right. As we know from social media and all the videos and stuff, there's a lot of oversharing, and that's what some people need to get through.
Yeah.
And others it's more of an inward journey, and that's okay as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about, we were talking before we hit record about, all the messaging that you get about how to be online. And part of that is being consistent, which is, I think, such a disservice to creative people because creativity isn't consistent. So
that's
if
right.
that's a problem for me. It's also a problem for people. And it's ableist. That's right. I don't want to show up online all throughout my cycle. Sometimes I just want everybody to F all the way off.
Yes, no, I understand. Yeah. You need that rest. You're not on a 24-hour clock. You're on, if you're someone who menstruates, you're on whatever your cycle is.
Yeah.
And even if you're not menstruating, or you can't menstruate, or you don't menstruate, your body still has a cycle that's going on.
There's still a hormonal cycle happening.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the other thing, not consistency, but the other thing is about being vulnerable. And there's this whole story around you've got to share your truth and be yourself online and all this stuff. And it's taken me a long time. People talk about, I shared this thing and it was too much, and they have a vulnerability or a visibility hangover where they feel like they overshared. But they're like, but that's what I've got to do to be successful. And that's actually not true either.
No,
and I get stuck on that. And I'm wondering, does that resonate with you? And because you've done a lot of stuff online and received a lot of anger and hate for what you've done and said, it's been very valuable. And for the right people, it's really been important for you to do that. And, I hope that you know that the things that you've said and done have been an important thing, and I hope that you don't regret it. But I'm
No, I
interested.
don't. No, no.
Yeah,
I even said to my husband recently when I was going through like the archive of my Instagram posts, going, I don't regret a single thing that I wrote or said
yeah,
because it was said because it hurt. It was said
yeah,
because I was in an experience. It was
yeah,
said because of the deep compassion and empathy I feel for people who are marginalized,
yeah,
and this is, like when we never see it sometimes is really hard to feel hope because you never see the end of when is all of this oppression and horrible shit going to stop happening. We're
yeah,
human. We are not perfect. Some
mm,
of us are more imperfect than others. Some of us are crueler than others. Some of us are more loving than others.
mm,
Yeah, I received a lot of anger and hate and stuff, and it was very draining,
yeah,
very, very draining. And it's not until you experience it that you really kind of see what toll it takes. But if
yeah,
you put that experience on someone who has PTSD or is neurodivergent or is PTSD and is autistic like myself, ADHD also like myself, that's
yeah,
like a really heavy lot of baggage to cart around. And so part of the continuing to show up and the anger is because there is a community that is exhausted and burned out and sick of
mm,
this shit. And so why not use my voice as a biracial person with, the privilege that I have? It didn't always feel safe. Absolutely not. The hatred that I received largely came from women and some men. The most horrible stuff was from men, but women were pretty fucking horrible, let's be honest. And I said that. My friend Nadine Shamali invited me to speak when she was doing her talk at the Brisbane Feminist Festival some years back. And I just shared that, just because someone is your sister doesn't mean they're your sister, you know. And so, you learn that the hard way. And so, you know,
mm,
through that experience, greater discernment, better boundaries, more tending to myself, that kind of stuff. But you asked me earlier with the book, like, what was the hardest to write? Well, it's absolutely, my experience, what became my first experience of PTSD. So that's for reference, that's Red Jumper, Blue Jeans in the book. That was the hardest because I knew I was going to write about it. I just didn't know how. And then it just kind of popped up one night after everyone in the house had gone to bed. And I was like, I guess I'm doing this now. And it was one part of the book that I refused to read over and over again after it was edited. There was no way I was going to read that again because
mm,
I've lived that. I wrote it. It was, it took the longest for me to write than any other part of the book in
yeah,
terms of, when I initially had the idea through to when I executed that story. Yeah, that was the hardest. But overall, like there were some moments when I was writing the book and it just felt like that rhythm, that music, it was like flowing through. And so I hope that people feel that what was poured into those parts of the book where, I'm calling for more depth of feeling, to show up for yourself and to know that you deserve more. Like ultimately becoming more of you is
yeah,
not a selfish thing. Becoming more of you, this is your life. So don't be limited by what anybody else has to say, particularly haters, particularly people that troll you, that, show up as perfect people in their daily lives and in their businesses, but then are, slowly trying to
mm,
stab you in the back repeatedly, and they're
yeah,
among us. So that's hard. It makes the journey lonely as well
mm,
because you're like, well, you don't know who you can tell that this happened to you because of this person. So you just keep
mm,
going and doing your own thing. But I found as an only child and someone who enjoys my solitary time, some parts of the lived experience must be processed solo, you know, and
yeah,
writing can be a part of that in a journal privately or in a book. But I would certainly urge anyone who was considering to write a book that has, the themes around racism, sexism, and trauma to really get some support,
mm, yeah,
beforehand. And it would, I imagine, be quite draining to write when in the throes of some of those really nasty things. Because for
yeah,
me, writing after the fact allowed me time to process, recover,
yeah.
after a few
Build the
years and
strength.
stuff like that. Yeah, yeah,
I think there's
yeah.
a quote called, was it right from the scar, not the wound? something like that.
Yeah, I think I've heard that too. I don't know who said that, but yeah, that's
No.
beautifully put.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember. I know I've heard it as well. It's maybe Gabor Mate or someone like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Someone who teaches things like that. I don't know. Might have been Eckhart Tolle, someone, I don't know.
Oh,
But anyway,
okay.
I do like it. I do think, yeah, it's true because that comes back to that being vulnerable and being yourself online or whatever. Like,
Mm.
some people heal through sharing their story in real time, but if that's not you and you're, like wanting to write about it, but write your experiences right once you've learned the lesson and feel strong because yeah, people will pick at the things
Yeah,
that
people will pick, but if your whole aim is to publish a book that people are going to benefit from,
mm,
develop from, learn from, heal from,
mm,
love themselves more, then you're going to want to write it from a place where you're helping
mm,
someone, not
yeah,
taking someone through your experience and dragging them through that as well when they've got their own stuff. I hope I achieved what I wanted and not, you can share an experience, but not like, make someone be part of that as well. I hope
yeah.
through the process of my writing, when someone reads it, they don't have a takeaway like, that they got hurt by it.
Yeah, no, I think, I can see now that now that I'm talking to you as well, more about where the book's coming from, in that you're sharing a story about each way that you could have or have in the past felt a lot of pain around all of I guess you call them labels or experiences that you can have in
Mhm.
life. And you've had quite a few of them, and how actually ultimately that's been a way to get to know yourself more and to get to understand your own needs. And that really is what the book is about. Permission to, for whatever reason society says that we should try to be different than what we are, regardless of who we are, we should try to be someone else. And I don't know why society's like that, but this is what the book's about, like reconnecting to who you are and getting to know
That's
yourself,
right. Yeah.
and accepting those things, those lessons and those hardships that you might experience. But also, if you do have privileges, to use those to better society as well, if you can.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that everybody does have a spectrum of those things in some level or not, some more than
Yeah.
others. But yeah, so thank you for writing the book. I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention the one thing that I did write in the book that was like, during the process of it happening was,
Mm.
my neurodivergence discovery. But I
Yeah.
felt that was a really important piece to put in the book because I had a lot to say, as it turns out, in the book when I did the word count on it, was
Yeah.
because a lot of books that talk about or are for or written by people who are autistic and or ADHD, it's about, all the definitions and the labels and, which traits do you have and that kind of
Mm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a good part of the book before I knew, so
Yeah.
really like the last 10,000 or so, you know, 10, 15,000 words were written like in that final stage, last year, whereas the rest was written, as I went along over the last, 4 or 5 years, whatever, however long it was when I first began the project. And so through the telling of the story, I hope, and I know I could see when I was reading my books during the proofreading process, I'm like, I already knew.
Yeah. I know. I was going to say, like, how
I knew
autistic
on
are
another
you?
level.
It was
Yeah.
very clear.
Yeah, in the introduction, I felt when I was like, yeah, yeah. I still, and just the level of detail, that I can still recall as from childhood as well.
Yeah.
And also so many, and this is a tangent, so many more things I remembered about my childhood, like the moments that gave me joy, like the little unique things about myself popped up, like that I remembered. And then, yeah, just it was really interesting, just kind of going, oh, you have one memory come back to you as you're writing, and then all
Mm.
these other ones pop up, and like, oh, all of the data was there. It's just I was like, didn't, hadn't put it all together yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think, one good thing to a certain degree with social media is that it's enabled a lot of autistic ADHD and people in the neurodivergent sort of community to share more about their experiences so
Mm.
that the world feels a little bit smaller in that we might, live these great distances away from each other, but sometimes, words written by someone from across the world, like, something that they did or how they try and manage, some of the ups and downs of their traits and stuff, you just go, oh, I totally feel that as well. And so the
Yeah.
world feels a little smaller because there's more visibility. People are actually, from the communities are represented and are representing
Yeah.
themselves. And so we all benefit from that. So I hope, like, the few thousand words that I wrote about my experience going through it, the realization, but also through the whole book, where it's just clear that I have very particular special interests.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that some of them go all the way back through to childhood, like art and creativity. That's stuff I was doing when I was 5. Almost 42 years later, I'm
Yeah.
still a kid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we all are. And
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm
yeah.
interested. What were you going to say? Sorry.
I was going to say earlier, you mentioned with motherhood, and I was just thinking about how the number of times I've spoken to people over the years who have been women and have said, oh, I'm not an artist, I can't draw. It's like, well, are you trying to draw what you feel, or are you trying to draw like these pairs? Like,
Mm.
So for
Hmm.
me, anyone, like the blank canvas, yes, it's a bit daunting, but you slap some words on there, like, you're really happy, put all those words there. You're really pissed off, put all those words there, cover them up, paint them. Like, it's a process. And that's far easier done on the page than it is done in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
So
that.
I really want to sell that whole art thing. Go and get yourself some art supplies, go and grab your Sharpie from the kitchen
Mm-hmm.
drawer and just express yourself, because,
Yeah.
that's sometimes why we can't get our words out. That's sometimes why we
Mm.
fawn. That's sometimes why we make ourselves smaller. I
Yeah.
know, just as a side note, over the decades, how I made myself smaller physically. Like, I'm average-ish height, 5'8", but I had terrible posture, and
Yeah.
I made myself smaller.
Punch. Yeah.
When I was
Mm.
a teenager from the bullying, it's just like, it's like, how many rocks am I wearing on my back,
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
my posture is still awful,
Mm.
and I have to straighten up when I think about it. But just, sometimes it's people make you feel intellectually smaller, or, abilities smaller, or,
Mm.
physically. Don't let people make you small.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Just be your weird self. I'm interested to know, when you first found out officially that you had autism and ADHD, did you look back and revisit the experiences through your life and go, oh, that makes a bit more sense now? Or you did, like, you see it in a different way, like, I can see why I reacted that way, or I'm sort of thinking of the ways that you might have, regulated yourself
Mm.
through creativity or whatever. Did it sort of did some sort of clarity happen? You go, oh, now I get it. It's a bit more
Um,
self-knowledge or something like that.
yeah, there was something that, I guess, the thing that popped up first, and I try and think of other things, and the same thing keeps popping up. It's like,
Yeah.
it was really more about the bullying and stuff, like how I was treated by others. It's kind of like, I used to, if I look back on a number of instances, I would think, oh, this is why they didn't like me. But now I look back going, that's probably, having the traits, the directness, the honesty, the fierce loyalty, the justice sensitivity, being that forthright, wasn't liked. So
Yeah.
I have answers in that way, whereas I used to think it may have been other things that I wasn't liked for. But
Mm.
now I'm like, well, those might be the attributes that weren't like then, but not once did I ever go, I should change for anybody else.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, which
I
is,
felt like there were times I wanted to change, like,
yeah.
early adulthood in relationships where, you're told you're too much or too whatever, and you do kind of contract a bit. But ultimately, it's like, when you are told by people you're too much, or, you're too angry, or you're too, whatever the too muchness in somebody else's context is about you,
Mm.
um, you contract, but also you realize that innately you can't do what they want, because that's not who you are. And so whether you
Mm.
know the answers or not, whether you have a diagnosis or not, ultimately, you know yourself better than anybody.
Mm.
And I can say now that, I'm sorry, too bad, not going to change. Like,
Yeah.
this is it. I'm only going to get better,
Yeah.
but I'm going to get better in the way that I have evolved,
Mm. Yeah.
rather than I'm going to change because someone thinks, my interests are strange and unusual or like childish or anything, It's
Mm.
like humans can be so judgmental. I'd
Yeah.
rather spend my energy doing things I love than simpering away and judging and criticizing what other people are doing.
Yeah.
You
I
don't
know.
like my yum? Good. You do your thing. I'll do my thing over here, far
Yeah.
away.
Yeah,
Like, and
exactly.
that's okay.
Mm.
And I think people are so used to getting involved in other people's stuff,
Mm.
thinking that their judgment or their criticism
It's helping
or
sometimes.
themselves, or themselves have the right to change somebody else.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes it's a case of look in the mirror.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like instead of judging other people, think about where your life might benefit from focus or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, put
Um,
energy to some good use.
yeah, exactly. I do want to talk about one more thing before we say goodbye, and that is you did mention it before about that slow burn and that can
Mm.
like I'm a candle, and you reference like being a late harvest, which I sort of like take away from that as, maybe it's a woman thing of, we're young, impressionable women, and then we become mothers or we hit that middle age, like 30s, 40s. And then I think perimenopause and menopause starts to come knocking and we become who we really meant to be. And I think a lot of us expect that by the time we hit that point, we might be already knowing who we are, have had a trajectory, and that might be where our life starts to decline. But I feel personally like the best is yet to come for me as a
Yeah,
woman as I get older and as I become more certain of who I am. And I hope that a lot of women feel this way or can maybe take something away from this. That life is, that used to be, yeah, life declines after you hit menopause, but actually we're so much more valuable than that. Society has said that once you're not fertile anymore, you haven't got a use. But we have 30 plus years of a career after we hit like your age, my age. I'm only still late 30s. But anyway, the point is, what are you most looking forward to in your what we would call Marga and crone years, which is
mm.
and yeah, you did say like the best is yet to come and that you're only getting better. So
Yeah. Well, I guess, I feel like I've had enough years to look back on that I sort of
mm,
wrote about in the book to age 45. That's like enough decades to go, oh shit, I made that same mistake again and again and again and again, and I could have done better there, or oh yeah, that was not a good moment. And then just,
mm,
making amends in whatever way is needed for the soul. But I would say that first, that whatever age it might be for you to kind of go, yeah, I can look at the next stage of my life. Or I tend to find that when there's a crossroad,
mm.
when there is a time of transition that's deeply, deeply uncomfortable, that's usually a good time to address your shit,
Yeah.
and also recognize like what good stuff you do have because,
Mm,
the world's been pretty taxing on all of us over the
yeah.
last few years in particular. You know, for some people, it's not their first shit show, but I think for people that are in our age bracket, this is.
Yeah.
And sometimes hope, in some of the hardest times is hard to grasp, not when we see like who's running the nations around the world, but
Yeah. It's a bit of a
um
concern.
yeah, it is a bit of concern. Yeah, I think that should be handed over to the Margas and the Crones. But anyway, it's a short opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm just noticing, as a parent to a grade 12 daughter, she is going to be finishing high school this year, and just sort of noticing like how our life is going to change, through, her going through to her next stage of her life and stuff like that. And I don't know, I just feel like I can take my time more now. Like, I don't feel like the last 46 and a bit years was a rush job. Not at all. But things evolved slowly. I evolved slowly. It took some time and also some many repetitions to stop making the same errors in judgment, to stop making the same mistakes. I can look back and I can see all the patterns. And you might be at a stage of your life where you can't see any freaking pattern. It just looks like one big scribble that you want to etch a sketch away. But it's during those difficult times that you can find more within you than you thought was possible. And
Mm,
so that can happen at any time. I've been through a few different stages of transition, but I feel like now I'm kind of not locking in, but kind of like gradually sort of coming more, not only more home to myself as a human, but also as a parent, and also the wisdom that I feel like I can, like rely on my inner wisdom for
Mm.
things, so decisions and that kind of thing. And when I feel like anything obsessive arising, like something that I'm interested in or something that I'm going back to because I was like, oh, that's right, I used to enjoy that, or I can still dive deep, but I don't have to be into everything. I can just pick a few things and that's cool. This
Mm.
is not to be replicated for, business advice either. Some people go, just focus on one thing or just have a few things. Dude, I used to have like 9 things, and all I kept being told repeatedly, reduce, reduce, reduce. I reduced, and then I reduced the business, and then I'm now actually happy doing other things, enjoying my leisure time, having a weekend, doing work, that's very integrity and person centered, in my employment. And I'm actually quite happy with the way things are right now. Yes, there's room
Yeah.
for improvement, but I'm not going to sweat anything because there's been enough of that in the past. So
Yeah.
I just want to enjoy the process of getting older.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm noticing is being biracial and having my parents come from two different racial identities. As I get older, when I look in the mirror, washing my face, whatever, I see more of my parents in my face,
Yeah.
just in little ways, as much as when you are close to your parents and you've seen them age and you recognize things and then you see it in you. And it's just like this, it's so interesting. I never saw it as much before, but
Mm.
now as I get older, I'm seeing that evolution in my face, which is quite interesting. I'm not much of a stare at my own face or anybody else's face for that matter, but it's just like, oh, I'm just noticing these like little things. And since I saw my parents recently, I was like, yeah, there's more of these little things. And not
Yeah.
only is it the physical, it's also like the behavior,
Mm.
the jokes, the kind of having to do things a certain way. I'm like, yeah, thanks, Mom, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I'm proud to have the parents I have, and I know that's not something many people can say, but I do want to say it here. But yeah,
Mm.
it's like, yeah, I'm looking forward to just tending to family and what brings me joy,
Mm.
and just seeing like, no rush, there's no rush.
Yeah, I
And
love
if
that.
yeah, and if I do it this way, who knows, like, how much time, it's just,
Mm.
I'll just see, but I'm not wasting any time anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I get the feeling that there's a little bit less need to be known and to just be. And if people need, they can come to you a little bit more rather than feeling like you've got to go out and
Yeah.
save and rescue and
Yeah, it was very exhausting being online all the time. And I think
mm,
when you are only like when you're just working for yourself, it gets really quite taxing. But
mm,
then you're propelled into this, I got to do this because if I don't show up, then, I'll
mm,
have, I've got bills to pay, that kind of stuff. And that
yeah,
was just very, very stressful. And, it's just a small percentage of those that work in the coaching fields make, big bucks. And so, I do much better doing what I'm doing now.
yeah,
And I
good.
get to enjoy my life, and I get to not experience what I used to experience online. Yeah, it's just interesting how things change when if your
Definitely.
path takes another direction, whether by choice or just because that's what happens. But yeah,
Yeah,
I'm, yeah, much happier with the way things are. I thought that I would always run a business, but I just burned myself out because I
yeah,
couldn't stop. I
yeah,
was a workaholic. I couldn't stop myself. Like, you know, it's like external advice. Yes, take it slow, have set hours and stuff. It's like that does not work for somebody like me. And I can't
mm,
just stop if something is an
burning at
obsession, if
you.
something
Yeah,
if something means a lot to me, if people mean a lot to me, if I want change to happen, like I couldn't stop. Like
mm,
that's kind of like really obsessive. And it's probably the first time I've even shared what it was like, but it's just I can't stop.
yeah,
And then you burn out, and then you realize that, like, how many more years is it going to take before I don't feel tired anymore?
mm, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I think that's probably that anyone listening who's neurodivergent can probably definitely resonate with that feeling of not being able to stop.
Yeah.
When you get on a roll with something that you're so passionate about.
Yeah, you just start noticing when it's going, what's the measure of what's far too long? I don't know, when other stuff starts going on and you're like, oh my goodness, I haven't eaten. Oh my goodness, I haven't had a drink,
Yeah.
Just those important life things that you kind of keep needing to do that just seem like interruptions to whatever your latest obsession is. So I just find like dipping in and out of the things that I'm doing is, works for me. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for your time today, Sharon. It's been so great.
Thank you, Rachelle. Love speaking with you. Love your questions.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. It's such a rich conversation. So, yeah, before you get going, do you want to share, are you online anymore? Like, can people come and find you? You're not really posting much anymore, are you?
No, I don't post a great deal. I am still on Instagram and I do have a Ko-fi community, but I haven't been doing a great deal of writing there at the moment because I'm still deciding what I'm going to do next in terms of, do I want to create something that I put out there, or do I just want to enjoy the imaginings of my inner world and just what I'm obsessing over at the moment.
Yeah, beautiful. But if anyone wants to grab your book, where can they get it?
Oh, available at all online booksellers and in store. You can maybe order it depending on your local bookstore.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rachelle.
That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.